The nation's biggest banks made a dramatic move today to rescue a smaller bank and head off a potential crisis.
A big move now. Some of the world's largest banks have given First Republic Bank a $1 billion bailout to keep it from collapsing.
California-based First Republic Bank was given a $30 billion lifeline from 11 other banks in a deal partly brokered by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
Your money in tonight after the collapse of those two American banks. The rescue this evening, a group of American banks now creating a $30 billion rescue package to save First Republic Bank.
It's happening again. Another U.S. bank went under. First Republic is the 14th largest U.S. bank, yet they may be on the brink of financial collapse. 4 banks have hit rock bottom in less than a week. Silvergate Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Credit Suisse. And now the contagion has spread to one of America's biggest regional banks. Despite being a mid-sized bank, First Republic caters to the same wealthy clientele as Silicon Valley Bank. Now, it's looking like they might end up sharing a little more than just clients. Since the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic has lost a whopping 70% of its market value. And just like all these other banks, the guys in charge knew what was coming long before it happened. On March 6th, 2 days before the banking sector crisis, the bank's chief risk officer sold company stock. And since the beginning of the year, insiders have sold almost $12 million in company stock, including Executive Chairman James Herbert II, who has sold $45 million worth of shares. They all knew what was coming. But what they didn't know was just how far the government would go to bail out their rich clients with taxpayer money. So they sold their stocks, just in case they went the same way as SBV. The bank's president of private wealth management, Robert Thornton, made the largest sale of the year on January 18th, dropping 73% of his shares, totaling $3.5 million. Before that, he hadn't traded since 2021. Stay dangerous, and let's get into it. First Republic shares a lot of similarities with Silicon Valley Bank. They had an overlapping client base, they both prioritized serving the extremely wealthy, and they also both had an alarming amount of uninsured deposits. About 70% of its deposits are uninsured, above the median of 55% for medium-sized banks, and the third highest in the group after Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Because of these similarities, it didn't take long for people to start worrying First Republic Bank was about to go the same way as Silicon Valley Bank. And since the only smart thing to do when a bank goes under is to get out, shareholders started selling stock at record rates. Before First Republic Bank even had a chance to make a public statement, things went from bad to worse. Since the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic has lost more than 70% of its market value. Its stock was plunging, and after Silicon Valley Bank, everyone knew what would happen if First Republic didn't get bailed out fast. Luckily for First Republic, Daddy Government was right there waiting to give them a handout. The plan for the rescue of First Republic Bank first emerged on Tuesday during a coordinated call between Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Jerome H. Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The mid-sized lender reached a deal on Thursday to receive $30 billion in deposits from nearly a dozen banks in an effort to ease investors' fears and stabilize the banking system. So a dozen big banks and the Fed got together to bail out First Republic. But how did First Republic get here in the first place? Since the start of 2023, there's been some seriously shady stuff happening at First Republic. Insiders at the struggling regional bank First Republic sold $11.8 million in the company's stock this year, shortly before its share price collapsed. 6 First Republic insiders sold 90,682 shares of the firm's stock between January 17th and March 6th, at a share price between $123 and $145. They include Executive Chairman James Herbert, CEO Michael Roffler, Head of Credit David Lichtman, and Banking Chief Michael Selfridge. those shares would be worth just $3.1 million at First Republic's Thursday share price of $34.35. None of the filings by executives were indicated to be under 10b5-1 plans, essentially meaning none of them were pre-scheduled sales. Basically, this means that executives were dumping their shares as fast as they could because they knew something big was about to go down. In fact, the bank's chief risk officer sold stocks just days before Silicon Valley Bank failed and set off the crisis. But that didn't matter. Just like the banks before them that went under, First Republic was once again deemed too big to fail. And for the biggest banks, it was the perfect time to consolidate power. The business of banking is completely dependent on the masses believing that the bank can pay them back, even though they do not have enough money on hand to do so. If there's even one tiny chip in the armor, it could trigger a bank run. And the thing is, this applies to all banks. If the masses lose trust in one bank, they'll start to question other banks too and withdraw their money. So if you're a banker, you're kinda all in this scheme together. No matter how much you hate your competitors, if they collapse, you're probably gonna have to fork the bill if you don't want them taking you down with them. But if you do it right, you can turn this bailout into a massive opportunity to consolidate power. Just like what John Pierpont Morgan did during the Panic of 1907. Him and other bankers bailed out the entire stock market and the banking system. He assembled the city's commercial and trust company bankers, put them in separate rooms, locked the front door, and kept the key in his pocket until he could negotiate a deal. At 4:30 a.m., Morgan finally bullied them into signing an agreement. It called for the trust company bankers to bail out their brother bankers who were struggling with runs on their deposits. When it was all said and done, and JP Morgan was called in to testify before Congress, he was asked whether he commanded any power over the economy. He replied, quote, "Not the slightest," end quote. And it looks like the same thing is happening today. The 11 biggest banks in America knew that by giving First Republic some money, they'd be showing everyone just how strong and resilient America's banking system was. And if people believed the banking system was okay, they'd be less likely to bring down other banks by selling stock or withdrawing their money. In a press statement, the bank said their action, quote, "reflects their confidence in First Republic and in banks of all sizes," end quote. Adding that, quote, "regional, mid-size, and small banks are critical to the health and functioning of our financial system," end quote. First Republic Bank officially got the go-ahead to borrow a $30 billion lifeline from some of the largest banks in America. This show of support by a group of large banks is most welcome and demonstrates the resilience of the banking system, the Treasury Department enthusiastically said in a statement on Thursday. But just like the Panic of 1907 and the Great Financial Crisis of 2008, we won't know the extent of all the shady stuff happening right now until years later.